Okay, are we good, Krista?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the Tuesday, January 26th, Dunn County Planning, Resource and Development Committee. I see that from my screen that all of our committee members are present, including our county board chair. So we have a quorum. Approval of the minutes from January 12th, 2021. Is there a motion?
Anderson, I move to approve.
Supervisor Anderson moves. Is there a second?
I can second, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Morehouse.
We have a second. Any questions, discussions, or corrections? Hearing none. All those in favor of approval, say aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed, same sign. Okay, the minutes are approved. We do have some public comment. And you know what, Tom, I think I forgot my reading glasses today. So if you could read these, it probably would be most helpful. Thank you.
Sure, I can do that. We do have 3 public comments this morning. They're all related to the accessory dwelling unit discussion that's going to be taking place later on in the meeting. I will read through them in the order we received them. So this first one was from Dorothy Bacon, came on Saturday, January 16th at 2:03 in the afternoon. To PR&D and whom it may concern, I am writing about small homes and their locations and considerations. I think my situation is similar to many in this area. 50 years ago, I helped buy a farm in derelict condition. We rebuilt and tore down and constructed homes. We brought fertility and conservation to the fields and forests. Now, nearly 80 and having health issues, I am so grateful to be in a small house very close to my children who can daily visit me as needed and in so many ways. And we, with so much experience, can aid and assist in the ways we can to the next generation as they have taken over farming and other responsibilities. I hope you will show your respect by supporting our efforts to remain where we are, valued and useful. Very sincerely, Dorothy Bacon, Menominee, Wisconsin. Move on to the second one. This public comment was received from Julie Bendel on Monday, January 25th, 2021 at 9:40 a.m. To members of the Planning and Resource Development Committee, I am writing as a member of the Health Done Right Housing Action Team. Health Done Right is a community health coalition represented by local organizations, healthcare providers, government and community members. As part of this coalition, the mission of the Housing Action Team is to ensure that all our residents thrive in safety, healthy, affordable homes. We are in favor of finding a variety of ways to increase housing options that are affordable. We hope you will take this into consideration as you discuss additional dwelling units. Thank you, Julie Bendel, Stewardship, Community Foundation of Dunn County. And our last public comment came from Tracy Glens on Monday, January 25th, 2021 at 2:04 p.m. Greetings. I am writing in favor of extending zoning support for accessory dwelling units, ADUs in Dunn County. The resources cited in the Breen's letter and the facts and statistics within them are excellent, and I won't regurgitate them, except to say that I am in full agreement that ADUs would fill a need in Dunn County, a need typical of many communities around the country, for affordable housing for the elderly, low-income families, and others struggling to provide themselves and their families with even the basic human needs of food, shelter, and clothing. They also appeal to people who are concerned about climate change and wish to reduce their carbon footprint. One of the barriers to downsizing housing is zoning laws, which have minimum size requirements that discourage environmentally friendly living. Governments should be doing all they can to encourage, not discourage, actions of citizens to minimize the impact of climate change on the whole community. The current options for ADUs within current Dunn County laws, as stated in the memo from the Environmental Services Department dated December 31st, 2020, are overly burdensome and again discourage building these smaller dwellings. None of them are expedient or inexpensive. I would also like to introduce the idea of movable tiny houses, i.e. tiny houses on trailers, as ADUs. Currently, tiny houses on trailers are considered RVs by the state of Wisconsin and most other states, and there are laws against living in an RV full-time, so this would need to be addressed. Movable tiny houses have the same benefits as permanent ADUs and would eliminate some of the concerns about what happens to ADUs when they're no longer needed for their original intended purpose. A movable house could be sold and moved to a different property. They also tend to be less expensive to build than homes on foundations and can be built in factories to meet specific criteria for quality of build, safety, and amenities. Of course, there would need to be restrictions written into statutes that prohibit parking an old RV or trailer in the backyard and calling it an ADU. There are some communities in California that have been the first to specifically allow movable tiny homes as ADUs, and their statutes can be found online. Thank you, Tracy Glens, Lucas Township. And that concludes the public comments that we've received to date.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Carlson, and thank you to citizens who contributed to that. Moving on to the agenda, without objection from the committee, we do item number 8, the review and action on a variance request from Donald and Tanya Larson. I'm wondering, I think that Ms. Larson is, I believe, would like to speak to this. So with respect to her time, I'm wondering if it would be okay with the committee, without objection, if we move that item up to be the first item on our agenda up ahead of 6A. So 6.8 would be the first item. Any objection to that? Okay. Then, Tom, are you going to introduce that?
I can introduce it. I just want to mention something, unless I'm missing it. I do not see Ms. Larson on our participant list.
Nope, she has not tried to join yet.
She did accept my invite. So, I mean, I can go through the report and maybe she will join before the conclusion of it, or I'm just bringing that up. She is currently not part of the discussion, so that may factor on your decision, Tom.
Well, either way, let's go ahead with this first and get it out of the way.
Okay.
If she's going to join, she's going to join now. Well, maybe she's not. I don't know. She might be waiting until later in the meeting. What do you think, Mr. Carlson?
I don't know. When I sent her the invite, I sent a separate email and just stressed that she please join the meeting at least 15 minutes ahead so we can work out any technical issues. So at this point, I'm anticipating maybe there's some technical issues. I don't know what else to
Okay.
to assume.
Well, why don't we address this issue right now and get it out of the way?
Okay.
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay. So Don and Tanya Larson variance request. They live on 1310th Avenue in Ridgeland, Wisconsin. They have some vacant land along County Highway F. Size of the parcel, I won't go through all the particulars here. The committee may remember the Larsons came before us back in, I want to say it was December, one of our December meetings, I believe the first meeting in December, asking for a variance request to create a new lot for sale for build residential purposes in a floodplain. And the recommendation of staff at the time was to deny the request, and that recommendation was accepted and acted upon by this committee. So the request was denied, and now the Larsons have come back to make another request to create an outlot on the same piece of land. So Don and Tanya Larson, applicant, own approximately 85 acres of land in the northeast 1/4 of section 21. Town 21 North, Range 13 West, which is currently zoned as general ag. The applicant would like to create a non-buildable outlot, roughly 13 to 14 acres in size. The proposed outlot will be bounded on the north and west by the Hay River, or the south and west by the Hay River, on the north by the north line of the south half of the northeast 1/4, and on the east by County Trunk Highway F. I'm just going to advance here. And you all should remember this, but this is the subject parcel here. It's bounded on the north by the 40 line, County Highway F on the east, Hay River on the south and west sides. The proposed outlot, so they want to make an outlot out of this vacant land. The proposed outlot is located entirely within the 100-year floodplain as mapped by FEMA. There's DNR mapped wetlands located on a significant portion of this outlot, or the proposed outlot. The creation of this proposed outlot requires the preparation of a certified survey map that needs to meet all the requirements of Chapter 16 of our subdivision condominium ordinance. Section 16.4.03 of the ordinance right here, to talks about or requires that all parcels shall contain a minimum of 10,000 square feet of contiguous land lying a vertical distance of 2 feet above the floodplain. The key word here is all parcels. If this word said all newly created lots, we would not be having this discussion today, but being it says all parcels, so that is not, specific to just lots. So this outlaw would be a parcel, and it therefore needs to comply with this ordinance requirement. So the proposed outlaw doesn't meet this requirement. Section 16.4.05 of the subdivision ordinance allows for a variance request and is worded as follows. Where in the judgment of the department and or committee, it would be inappropriate to apply literally the provisions of chapter 16 because exceptional or undue hardship would result. The staff and or committee may waive or modify any county requirement to the extent deemed just and proper. When such relief is granted, it shall be without detriment to the public good, without impairment to the intent and purpose of this ordinance. So I'll go back up to our analysis. So the Environmental Services Department has reviewed the Larson's variance request. The purpose of our flood regulations to the greatest extent possible is to discourage development in areas that will be impacted by the 100-year flood event. The proposed outlaw is located within the floodplain and below the base flood elevation. The base flood elevation for the proposed outlaw is at approximately 985 feet. So 985 is the flood contour running through here. The elevation of the proposed new outlaw ranges from a low of about 972 feet at the Hay River to a high of about 984 near the northeast corner of the property. The highest elevation on the proposed outlaw is about 1 foot below the base flood elevation. So the highest elevation out here is 984. The outlaw contains no land whatsoever that would satisfy or count towards the 10,000 contiguous square foot requirement. There are currently no existing uses or structures on the proposed outlaw. The granting of a variance to create an outlaw would not impact the public health, safety, and welfare. The granting of a variance would also encourage the most appropriate use of the land and would essentially prohibit any further development on the land. The placement of any structures on the proposed outlaw would not be permitted except as provided in section 13.2.2 sub 2 of the Dunn County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance. I have a copy of that up here. If we look at paragraph 2 here, temporary use of a mobile recreational vehicle is permitted in all agriculture districts, providing it is for recreational use of the owner or lessee of the property. The use does not exceed more than 180 days in a calendar year. And lastly, the mobile recreational vehicle is not connected to any private on-site waste disposal system or well. So these uses would be allowed on this proposed outlaw. So we have to look at our variance requirements next as part of our staff report. Variance requirements. So it would be inappropriate to apply literally the provisions of Chapter 16 because exceptional or undue hardship would result. The proposed outlaw is entirely impacted by the floodplain. A literal application of the provisions of Chapter 16 would not allow the applicant to parcel off this piece of land, which would result in an undue hardship. The variance shall be without detriment to the public good and without impairment to the intent and purpose of this ordinance. Section 16.102 below lists all the purposes of our subdivision ordinance. So reducing congestion in the streets or highways. And by the way, the bold underlined comments are staff comments. So our response to item A here, or stipulation A, is the creation of the proposed outlaw would not create significant congestion in the streets or highways. Furthering the orderly layout and use of the land, the permitted uses on the proposed outlaw would be consistent with how the land is currently being used. Again, it would not be able to be developed for residential purposes with the outlaw designation. Item C, securing safety from fire, panic, and other dangers. The creation of the proposed outlaw would not pose a risk for fire, panic, or other dangers. No structures would be allowed on the proposed outlaw except for those provided in section 13.2.2 sub 2 of the zoning ordinance, which I just explained what those provisions are. You're going to see this come up again here very shortly. Providing adequate light and air. The creation of the proposed outlaw would not reduce the adequacy of light and air. avoiding undue or improper concentration of population. The creation of the proposed outlaw would not result in undue or improper concentration of population. Only those structures allowed in this section of the zoning ordinance would be allowed or permitted on the property. Facilitating adequate provisions for transportation, water, sewer, schools, parks, playgrounds, and other public requirements. This one is not applicable to the request. And then lastly, facilitating where appropriate further re-subdivision of larger tracts into smaller parcels. The proposed outlaw could, in theory, be further subdivided in the future to create additional outlots. However, no structures would be allowed on any of the additional outlots except for those permitted in the section I referenced of the zoning ordinance. For this reason, any further subdivision of the proposed outlaw is not likely to occur. So at the end of all this analyzation, the staff recommendation, based on the analysis and variance requirements, we recommend approval of the variance request. The creation of the proposed outlaw would encourage the most appropriate use of the land and would not be detrimental to the public good. A copy of the Larson's written request was included in your packet. You should have all had that and had an opportunity to read through this request. I don't see the Larsons. Let me check one more time here if Tanya or Don have joined the meeting. I'm not seeing them, so I was going to say they could certainly speak to this request, but they at present are not here in the meeting. So that concludes, I'm sorry, my portion of the staff report. Again, we just feel this is the best use of the property. When I read their letter, they aren't, maybe I should just do that on their behalf. I won't read the entire letter, but I'll just kind of paraphrase, summarize. They've owned the property since January of 2016. During this time, they've had a couple summers that the water table was very high and flooded the bottom of their property on the south and west side of the river. There has also been flooding on the piece where they're trying to sell. However, they have not seen water on the north or east side of the property. They could enlarge this parcel, right? We talked about this last time. If they sold off at least 20 acres or more, it would be exempt from our ordinance. But in order to do that, they would have to include, 6 acres or more on the other side of the river, which in her words would not be practical or desirable to either party. So they're asking, with the information provided, they consider granting us an outlawed variance, sell the piece of land. It would not only allow us to make improvements to our farm, but would also bring extra income to the county. So are there any questions that I can answer from the committee?
Tom, this is Gary Bjork.
Yes.
Would the Board of Adjustment have any say in this type of operation and this type of a request or not?
No, this is not, it's my understanding, this is not a zoning issue. It's strictly a land division issue. And the only ordinance that we are looking at this time is the subdivision condominium ordinance, and Board of Adjustment action is not necessary for granting this variance because it doesn't have a zoning implication at this point.
Thank you.
Anybody else? It does look like this, we talked about this possible option at the last meeting, and this looks like it is something that works for them and works within our statutes. Anyone care to make a motion one way or the other on this? Motion to, I guess, approve the variance of section 16.4.03 from the Larsons.
Mike Kinnear here. I move that we approve the variance.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else?
I will second, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Supervisor Morehouse seconds. Any further discussion?
So what we're saying then is that we're going to prove that they can sell that and a home can be built on that? Is that
No.
No, we're saying they can sell it as an outlot and no dwelling can be built on it.
Right.
It sounds like a good compromise solution that protects the county's interests, but also provides them with an option. Any further discussion? And I'll call the question. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
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 Opposed, nay? Okay, carries.
Just one question, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Can't all outlots be sold with some restriction on them? No matter, as long as they're like more than an acre or acre and a half?
I would ask staff to comment on that.
I mean, the answer to that, I think, is yes. In the context, if I'm a developer, okay, I'm developing some land, I'm doing a major land division, I want to create a couple outlots on my plat. I, as the owner, have a right to place some restrictions on there and instruct my surveyor, okay, I want you to place a note on the final plat saying, outlot 1 is restricted to the following things. I'm placing those restrictions on there as the landowner. I suppose the county, maybe as a condition of approval, could also require that restrictions be placed on an outlot. I think if that was in agreement with a developer, I think that would certainly be a possibility. Let's just say the developer did not agree with our restrictions that are being placed on there. I don't know that we have that legal authority to require restrictions on an outlot. That would be something, I guess I'm just being honest with the committee. I can't answer yes or no to that unless Corp Counsel has any insight on that. But again, I think certainly a restriction could be placed on an outlot by the landowner if they so choose.
And I think it's fair to say that a lot of restrictions on outlots are already created through the ordinance, both the zoning ordinance and the land division ordinance. So I suppose a seller could impose a restriction, and depending on the proposed use in the zoning district that an outlot is in, and depending on who's giving consideration to whatever restriction is being recommended, it could be consistent with, zoning or land division in a way. And so it seems to me at least conceivable that some restriction might be imposed, but as a practical matter, there's not a lot you can do with an outlot. You can't build a dwelling on it, and so a lot of the restrictions I think that people that come to mind quite readily are already in place by virtue of it being an outlot. And this is, as an example, this is an outlot that, I mean, theoretically, an outlot can become a lot at some point, or more than one lot. But because of the nature of this, the size of this outlot, and the location of it, it's unless there are large changes in ordinance and perhaps even state statute, this lot is not going to be further developed in accordance with legal requirements.
Any other questions? I think we already voted on this, right? If I remember back to then. So let's move on then. Thank you. It was a good discussion. Staff reports 6A, alternative dwelling unit. Back to you, Tom Carlson.
And this would actually be Bob Colson.
Yeah.
Oh,
Is my microphone on?
Yes, Bob, can hear you fine.
Um,
Bob, we just lost you.
all right, so is that better now?
Yes.
All right, it should stay, but if it doesn't, I'll have to reinitialize it. So if we could go, Tom, just bring up Mr. Breen's. Let me see what the there. I'm not going to read that letter. You guys had that in your packet last time, so you should have had plenty of chance to read Mr. Breen's letter. Basically, what he's asking for, and this is not an unusual request, he's asking that he be allowed to build a second home on his property. In his case, for a loved one. I can't remember if it's his mother or his dad or his grandmother, but anyway, for a family member to live in there. Now we can go to the next one, Tom, which is that one right there. This is not an unusual request. We don't get a lot of them, but we get them, over the course of any given year. Less than 10, I would say, is probably reasonable where people ask this question. And the answer has been we don't allow more than one principal structure on a property, but there are some options that are available. Split the parcel, create a new parcel and build the structure on its own parcel. We do allow you that, you can add additional living quarters to your home and the loved one can live there. I mean, it may require some additions to your sanitation because the loads are different now, but that's another option. Rezone the parcel to an R2 and remodel your home into a duplex, and then have the people live on the other side of the duplex. Rezone the parcel to R3, and then you can build an ADU on site. And so R3, you can have multiple dwellings. I suppose the other one, that I thought of just as I couldn't sleep last night, is build in an area that's already zoned R2, and we have lots of land that's already zoned R2 in the county. But back in 2012, 2013, when there was the comprehensive rewrite going on, this topic did come up before the committee, and I don't recall who all was around during that discussion. But the committee had no objections, as does staff, to the idea of an ADU. And back then we were just calling it a mother-in-law flat or a mother-in-law suite. But the problem one of the problems that staff had at that time was that spoiler alert, nobody lives forever, and at some point the use is going to change. You may have full intentions, that you want to have that home for your grandmother, but when grandma can no longer live there, what happens to that second home? Chances are it's going to become a rental unit. There's enough investment, they're not going to take it down. And so it probably would become a rental unit. Also, during that rewrite, several towns raised the question of permitting duplexes in the R1 district. Back before the rewrite in R1, we allowed single family and duplexes. And there was concern that was raised by several towns who had heard concerns from their constituents, that they didn't like having rental units in developed or established single-family districts, and so they cleaned up the language, and now R1 is only single-family residential, and then they created the R2 and R3 districts. In looking at Mr. Breen's resources, and I didn't to go in and pull everything out. I pulled a couple excerpts out that I thought were relevant. But one thing that I think before we get into those is and this speaks to probably all of the comments in some degree that you had this morning. People are confusing or at least associating ADUs with affordable housing, and there was even one of the persons, I think it was Tracy Glenn's comment, was that our ordinance prohibits affordable housing, and actually back during the comprehensive rewrite there was much discussion. We used to have minimum square footage for a home, and it was removed from the ordinance because the committee said, that's affordable housing. You know, if someone wants to live in a tiny home, let them live in a tiny home. So we removed all anything that was kind of related to affordable housing. Any requirements, we remove them. They still have to meet UDC code, but we no longer have square foot requirements or anything. And so affordable housing is affordable housing. And so I think some people are misunderstanding, you know, what we've done. And a lot of people are connecting ADUs with affordable housing. And so now if we get into what Mr. Breen's letter and some of the resources, most of them talk about, you know, affordable ADUs as being affordable housing and a source of income, and also a place, you know, that you can have, you know, a loved one living next to you. But if you scroll down a little bit, the last paragraph, or the last couple sentences of the first paragraph of number 1, you know, I just want to bring this to the committee's attention. You know, hence an ADU that is approved as a mother-in-law flat today may be an Airbnb tomorrow. Municipalities should remain cognizant of the applicability of the short-term rental law as they craft ADU regulations. And so I bring that to your attention, not that I'm interested at this point in trying to craft some Airbnb language, although we may think about that coming up soon. But I think it's important to realize that, you know, that what this is saying, that a mother-in-law flat today may be an Airbnb, which, you know, Airbnb is a rental property tomorrow. So and then if you look at number 2 in terms of this was an AARP survey of 50 people 50 plus, and you know, these are some of the questions, and I realize that you know, we don't know how the question was asked, and you get different responses depending on how you craft your question. But these were the responses that were given from at least from that resource. Provide an additional home for loved ones in need of care. And so 84% of the people said that was right. That was where it was important. You know, I'm not going to read them all, but you know, for relatives or friends, increase the value of the home, create a place for caregivers, earn extra income. And so, you know, so there's a lot of reasons behind an ADU, and it isn't only for the mother-in-law flat. And that's the reason, that's what we get when people first call. Well, I just want a place for my mother to live. And you know, as the planner and the zoning administrator, I shouldn't say always, I almost always, or try to always, look beyond the person that is asking for the change, because none of us live forever, and once we make a change, that change is there for a very long time. And so removing the emotional piece of saying, well, I just want this, you know, for my grandmother to live next to us, you know, and it's not that zoning is cold-hearted and unemotional, but we need to see the long-term consequence of what happens if we allow that. And what happens generally is that when that use that they planned for, when those people can no longer live there, it's going to be a rental unit in an R1 district. And except for the fact that they're separate units, it's really a duplex in a single family district. You know, that was the reason behind the initial discussion with PR&D. It becomes a if we were to allow a second unit on there and say, well, it's restricted just to grandma, and when grandma's gone, there's going to be a deed restriction or some other thing that says that it can't be used for anything except for the people. And I don't know how all that stuff gets crafted. But the end result is that regardless of the language that's put in there and what you say, my office gets calls weekly of complaints of people that aren't following the ordinance. And to tell you the truth, we spend a lot of time on complaints. They take a lot of time to follow through, and it may end up bringing council into the picture if we can't get someone out of a home because of a deed restriction or whatever, some other restriction on there. So there's a lot in play here, and I think that the initial response is great, but beyond that, what happens? And so with that, I guess Mr. Breen also did give some other resources, and if Tom, if you want to scroll down to those, and I can just kind of so this is pretty much an extension of his first letter, and really wanting us to look at maybe putting some restrictions or rewriting our ordinance, and that's not that it's because it's a big deal that we shouldn't do it, but it's something that I think that before we venture down that path, I think that the county really needs to decide if this is really in our long-term best interest. You can keep scrolling, Tom. And I think that may be the last document in this. So most of the comments, it's for overcrowding, and in a lot of these references that in these are taken out of an urban context rather than a rural context. And I think to keep that in mind, Dunn County is very rural. That we have a lot of land, and in most cases, there is the ability to split a piece of parcel or a parcel and create another land, or there's land for sale, and it's so. I guess I just want to keep the context of who we are and where we're headed as we move down this and talk about ADUs or a second structure on a parcel. So with that, I guess I'll turn it back to the committee for questions, comments.
Thanks, Bob. Are there any questions or comments with what Bob presented from the committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Diane.
I think I asked Mr. Coulson this when this came up in December. Do any of our neighboring counties have this incorporated into the zoning ordinance, ADUs?
Not to my knowledge, not the ones that touch us, no. I didn't check the entire state, so.
Oh, no, you needn't. I was just asking about sort of surrounding
Yeah,
counties.
no. Most counties, are similar to us. A single structure on a parcel, unless it's an R2 or an R3. Unless it's zoned for, for something other than single family. It's kind of the norm.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Anderson.
I wonder if we could scroll down to number 5 on this page from Bob Coulson. Number 5. No, where was it? It had to do with rental. That only the people that own it can live in these parcels. It was
that is somewhere in there, yeah. Owner occupied.
there.
Kind of what we would classify.
No, that's not it.
It's immediately above the groundwater work group.
So it's it'll be on the last page, Tom. There we go.
Thank you. Number 5. Thank you. That's it. Rental ownership. And when I read that, it said, and that was a concern of mine, and yet it says that we believe can be adequately addressed in ordinance. St. Paul, Minnesota uses this. You have any comments on that?
Well, again, St. Paul, very urban setting. But regardless, a deed restriction. I spoke to this a little bit in my discussion. Is that there's a deed restriction, and the second person who gets that may or may not see that deed restriction, may not want to follow it and just shake the dice. And in the end, if they decide that they want to do something contrary to what's shown, now we're back to enforcement and trying to figure out how to undo what they've done, and it becomes a complaint. And this is probably one where on the deed restriction that we would probably have to involve counsel in order to, maybe if they don't voluntarily undo what they've done. These sound really nice, but people in general, and not everyone, and but people try to cut a corner when they can, and my office deals with those cut corners on a weekly basis, and so it sounds really good, but I could almost I would place a bet that over time that there would be some issues with even something legal, what looks very legal as a deed restriction.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate hearing that.
Bob, I have a couple of questions. I think you're right to note that this is not on its face a affordable housing issue, but it could be, but it's not. But I hear you suggesting that if we really want affordable housing in rural areas, we can do it within our existing zoning structure.
Exactly.
We could rezone property. We allow for a higher density. We allow for a smaller footprint of the dwelling. That would be a much more appropriate way to protect everybody's interest and provide affordable housing. I agree with that. I know of several instances where people have built mother-in-law or father-in-law apartments into their rural home, and are now, after time has gone on, are now renting those out on either a long-term basis or renting them out as a Airbnb basis. And in one case, at least a couple cases I know of, they're renting them out on an Airbnb basis, which in a way, if it's done right, could actually be seen as contributing to, one, the viability of that, if it's a farm, for example, the viability of that farm, but two, sort of an asset for rural tourism and economic development in our county. In other words, offering opportunities for visitors to stay in our rural areas where there aren't motels and there aren't hotels. So I think there's some merit to that. Three, if we don't have something like this, what if any options would the Reams have in terms of their desire to move in near their son? What could they do?
Well, I mean, the four that are on the screen are their options.
Okay.
And in speaking with Mr. Breen, I think he misunderstood our zoning ordinance, thinking that we have an 8-to-1 density. He was thinking he needed 8 acres to create this, and I told him no, it's only 1 acre, a minimum 1 acre that the county requires. Some towns require larger, and so but from the county's perspective, 1 acre minimum is all that's required. So they could split the parcel and build a home on the second parcel. They could add living quarters, and you spoke about that, Tom. They could remodel into a duplex and rezone it to a duplex, or build in a R2 district a duplex and have a traditional duplex, or they could rezone to the R3, a different, a multifamily district. So there are, those are the options that they have.
Anybody else have any other questions for now? Excuse me.
So I guess what I'm looking for on behalf
Yeah.
of Mr. Breen is,
Yep.
is some direction from the committee as to maybe, you know, where do you want us to go with this, if anywhere, beyond today?
So
Question,
anybody
Mr.
have any thoughts?
Chair?
Yeah, Gary.
I kind of like the 3 and 4 there of the options, because then it goes back to the local township or whatever. They'd have their input. Could that be a rezone? And my other question is, how close would they have to be to take care of their mother-in-law or father-in-law? Could it be like a mile down the road when they bought a parcel to build a smaller house on it? Is that close enough to take care of them, or does it got to be right next door?
Well, that's a personal question. I think that, you know,
Right.
each individual would have a different answer for that.
You know, but I know all of the surveys that was taken for the comprehensive plan was that they want to keep the rural areas rural, you know, but I don't know. And what I agree with Mr. Colson is that it's not just a short term what's going to happen, what's going to happen in the long term. And that's, I think, is the biggest question. Thank you.
Anybody else? Bob, what is your thought about, I hate to just completely take this off the table, this whole concept. And I do think it raises the question of probably having to go back and deal with the short-term rental, as you mentioned earlier, at some point, because we're going to see more of that in a rural context. It's certainly happening in an urban context too, but also in a rural context. But what are your thoughts about what, I mean, you could go back to the Breens and talk about this discussion and share these ideas with them.
I'm sure he'll be watching or is watching, so you just.
I'm sure, yeah, and yeah. I really
but
do.
But I'll certainly have a discussion with the Breens, as I would with anyone else that would ask this question. And so,
okay.
You know, so that's kind of where I'm at. Is just, you know, where do we headed? And, you know, I guess, you know, with respect to the Airbnb, that is something that is on my radar screen, and it came up near the end of last year. I haven't brought it to the committee yet, more out of just trying to get on top of other things, but it wasn't in the context of a second dwelling unit, you know, an ADU. It was in the context of out on one of the lakes, I think probably Tainter, but it doesn't
yeah, it's a
you know, on waterfront property where there are people who have speculated, bought a home, and the Airbnbs are renting it out, and we've had some issues, you know, with the number of people and parking on streets. Right. And so I think it's something, you know, that we need to address, either separate or maybe parallel with the ADU, but realize, you know, that Airbnb would be a much broader than just the ADU.
Anybody else have comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Diane.
This is going to sort of sound inarticulate, because I don't exactly know in what direction we should go, but I'm not real comfortable foreclosing this conversation. So seems like as we look for housing options and alternatives in the county, which I think we need to do if we look at affordable housing, if just even, you know, sort of focusing on demographics, it just sort of seems like we shouldn't simply just say, well, we're okay with this. Maybe we need to look into it in some more detail. And as I said, it sounds pretty inarticulate, but I don't want to stop having this conversation, I guess.
That's my thought also.
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Colson.
Yeah, I agree with Supervisor Morehouse that I think, you know, that there are probably some things that we could look at. And you brought up the term again, affordable housing. I think we could be much clearer in our ordinance in terms of affordable housing. I think that the ADU question that the committee really needs to focus on is aside from affordable housing, is it appropriate to have more than one principal structure on a piece of land? that's really the question that I get asked 10 times, this many times out of the year. Why can't I have a second home on this property? And that's kind of, those are the options. And that's where I think is what Mr. Breen is asking. And I think sometimes, terms like affordable housing come up as a way to maybe make it sound better, but in the end, they're separate issues. Affordable housing is separate from a second dwelling on a parcel, and I think if we can keep them separated, I think we should maybe go back and maybe look at affordable housing and some different ways of allowing or promoting different living quarters. But that's a different discussion than a second one on the parcel.
So, Bob, again, this is kind of ancillary in a way to our discussion, but in our agricultural zoning, we, under farmland preservation, I think we allow we have a provision that allows farms to have more than one dwelling unit on them. How in what way does that differ from this issue? What are the substantive considerations?
Yes, in all of our ag districts, there's and so that we have three. We have general ag, primary ag, and exclusive ag. And in all of those ag districts, there's a provision that says you can have a second dwelling for your, to house your hired hand, to house family members that are working on the farm. But the difference there is that that second unit, and again, we're stuck over time, just as we would be with this one. But in at least in the ordinance, it says that that second unit is there for something that is farm related. The second quarters is for the mom or dad that are working on the farm or that are living there, or for the hired hands. But as I said, over time, you could have the same problem that that farm gets split up, and now you have two parcels on a property. And at least in those situations, there's almost always, the farm is greater than 2 acres, splitting off that second parcel. So, but it's tied really to ag use, family members, and to hired, to the hired hand.
Thank you. Let's see if we can kind of summarize where we're at here. So I think the sense from the committee, if I have it right, is that we are not able to, or not interested in moving forward directly with establishing an ADU ordinance or provisions. We're suggesting that staff work with the landowner to see how, or the potential resident to see how our current options could work, but that we're not foreclosing the opportunity to look at this idea, which is emerging all the time, and see how it might apply to our rural areas in terms of housing needs and affordability and economic development and whatever. I'm not sure if that's not a plan necessarily, but does that sound like kind of where we're at? Anybody have a problem with that? Janelle, good luck with the minutes on that one. Okay.
I just have a question on that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So what is it that you would like staff to do beyond what we've done then?
Nothing. I don't think anything right now, Bob. But except you work with the landowner to try.
I got
find
that piece. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Otherwise, I don't think we may come back to this in the future. But for right now, I think we can. Is it okay with the committee if we set it aside for future discussion? And we're open to additional information and participating in future discussions on this, but we don't anticipate right now that we're ready to begin taking up the discussion of an ordinance on it.
Thank you. I got that.
That okay with everybody? Okay. Then let's move on. Review of groundwater ad hoc committee recommendations. I think Heather Wood, our water quality specialist, did some work in Dad's absence in sort of reviewing this, and maybe can help lead us through the discussion. Thanks for sending us out. Heather, are you on?
I am. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. I just kind of went through with the report that Dan had submitted to you guys. I believe October was the last time he gave you guys an update on this. Same format. The highlighted stuff is stuff that's changed since you were last reported. So we'll just go down and go over the highlighted stuff. And if you guys have any questions, I'll do my best to answer what I can. I think December Corporation Council sent me a draft of a wetland conservation ordinance. That, you know, with Dan's retirement, various things got shifted around and I had some time sensitive things. So it kind of got pushed back, but then I started getting emails from the DNR that they were in the midst of doing their own wetland rule revisions. So I talked to Nick over at Corporation Council and we decided to push the wetland ordinance back until after the DNR has finished with their stuff. We're looking at April, May to start, you know, revisit this and start more actively developing the ordinance. Moving on down, the nutrient management stuff, I wasn't totally sure where Dan got the 26% number. I think it was from last year's DATCAP report. So I figured I'd just update you guys. I talked to our nutrient management specialist, Travis, over here. Those are the contacts he got this year. It's basically a short and sweet of a conversation that I had with him about what's going on with the farmers and nutrient management in Dunn County. It is important to note that, especially with the CAFOs, that can have some overlap between other counties. So we don't really have, you know, a percentage of farmland currently under nutrient management, because the acres that the farms report could be, you know, 500 acres in Dunn County and 1,000 acres in Chippewa, but it's reported as 1,500 to us. And then, of course, you know, the manure storage ordinance, I have no clue where that's at. I imagine you guys would have a better idea than I would. Moving on. There's been a little bit of chatter about starting a rotational grazing initiative or program of some variety in land and water. That's something that we, you know, some staff have gone out individually with individual producers who have reached out to help them the best that we can currently. But there's some things that need to be sorted out before we can go all in on an actual program to implement and start doing outreach for rotational grazing. So that's not much has been done, but it's something we're aware of and kind of working on as we're able. What else was there? Oh, down a ways. This fall we had several new projects taken care of. The big ones being a well closure and manure storage pit closure. That was last year. This year we have funding to continue doing these as we do each year. And I know that there are several more of those projects in the initial planning stages. I'm working with one property owner for a well closure. I know I've heard other folks in our office are working on manure storage closures. We don't have anything finalized or anything like that, but still in the initial planning phases. We've started working with zoning to help them get caught up on the septic tracking, which will hopefully help us make sure people are staying in compliance. Hopefully I can get that wrapped up here in the next week or two. So Bob will have a better idea of what he needs for staffing in order to get that stuff fully taken care of. And then spoke with the town of Colfax in December. They did a bunch of well sampling, and I actually just received, she sent me over a copy of all of those test results last week. I need to get those entered in and sent over to land information to get included in our database. And I think that is it for us.
Thank you, Heather. Any questions or comments from the committee?
Mr. Chairman?
I think I got Gary Brook first, and then Mike.
Okay. The only concern I really have up there, and which I've always had, is that citation issue. To me, it seems like it's heavy-handed and intimidating, and it's really a great change between the relationship of Dunn County and its rural population. And there's very little documentation of its need. I've been on this committee going on 12 years, and I can't ever remember staff coming in and saying that they're having a hard time enforcing Dunn County ordinances because they don't have citation issues. So I just think there should be a lot more conversation about that, because we're not a police state. Everybody don't have to have a citation ordinance. We're getting so much done right now just with the cooperation. I don't know how many counties have 2 farmer-led watersheds, and you look around at all the like no-till, all the cover crops that's going on. And also, I know there's a bias against large modern ag in Dunn County. These big grain farmers are actually grid sampling their field. So maybe a 50-acre field might be plotted down to 20 different little sections that get different amount of fertilizer and different amount of seed per acre to try to not over fertilizer areas where it doesn't need it. And even myself, this year I plan on doing some tissue sampling just to see where the crops stand, if they need more, if there are adequate fertilizer going into it. So I am totally against that citation issue because there's no documentation that it's really needed. I remember asking Dan Prestabach, like how many times would you really need it? He said like maybe once a year. So that's the great impetus to change the way Dunn County interacts with its citizens. I'm just totally against it. So thank you.
May I just thanks, Gary. Those are important comments. If I can just reply briefly, I think Nick is reviewing this issue in a broad context about where there might be some potential benefit to having citation authority across the county departments and whatever, and the PR&D would be one, land conservation would be one of them. But I think you're right. We are far away from either having something to look at or having an opportunity to thoughtfully look at something like that. The recommendation from the committee was, I think, consider whether or not that would be valuable. And the points you raise are very valid and definitely I think are likely to will carry heavy weight when we get to that point of actually considering it. We're not even close to that point at this point in time, but appreciate your concern and your thoughts are very good. Mr. Kinnear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you could scroll down to the green where it talks about aggregate existing spatial data relevant. Yeah, there you go. I still have kind of a question on there, and then I have a general comment when I'm done. There's a point person, and Heather, are you the point person that gets all these, and then you work with Rachel? How does this go if somebody wants to give you their data?
Well, for the town of Colfax, for instance, I have a pretty good dialogue established over that way to some extent. And she just honestly called me up and said, hey, I'm, planning on doing this with my stimulus check, and she gave me a call after they did all the sampling, and, she just asked for advice as to how to go about it. And we talked about that a little bit, and then they took the lead and did all of their sampling. And then she called me up, probably about a week ago and said, hey, our sampling's done. I'm going to mail it over to you. Otherwise, for instance, the Red Cedar Conservation Farmers, I'm not the point person in our office for that, but, we work together, and Steve Olson is our point person for that. They do groundwater sampling. He and I talk, and he just drops them off in my office. We're still working out, who exactly is the point person. But for right now, I've been accepting, any data I can find, I get it and try and get it sorted out in the most coherent manner I can and send it over to Rachel in land information. And then she's the one actually building the database and the mapping background for it.
So has Rachel had time to put these in?
I don't know, honestly.
Okay, so if my neighbors got together and said 15 of us are going to do this, you would be the person that we would contact at least at this time?
Yep.
Okay. The other comment is I went back, and this is just a general comment. I went back either December 19 or January this year of 20. And I don't know if Heather gave enough credit, but there's a whole lot of stuff that got done here. It's really nice to actually compare what was given to us then and what's now. So it's lots of good things going on. Not as many green as we like, but that's the way it goes. Things are moving along, and you guys, the staff, should be proud of what they've done.
Thank you.
Any other comments? I do have one last thought. I did have a conversation with Chase Cummings, who will be coming on tomorrow, actually, and Chase has had discussions with all of our staff and with Dan, of course. And I think he will come on starting tomorrow, a little bit of a break, and then next week, I think Tuesday or Wednesday, full time for going forward. And in our discussion, we covered a bunch of the committee's concerns about where we're going and how good we've done and where we need to improve. And, I think one of his goals is to sort of assess where all this is at, where all the staff are engaged and how they're engaged. And then will make his own choices about how to address, for example, the question you raised, Mike, about where is the responsibility for this. I conveyed that the committee has always wanted to try and clarify that and make it as clear as possible so our staff, is able to organize their time most effectively. So I think that's something we can expect from Chase going forward, and this conversation can continue. Thanks a lot, Heather. Appreciate your help.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a comment? I have a question.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. This is my interest, of course, getting back to wells. When we talked about this, I live on town of Menominee, so I have my own private well. And every year I take a tap water sample and I take it up to Colfax Commercial Testing Lab and they test it. Here's my question. Obviously, I get it tested for nitrates. I get it tested for coliform. And then it comes back that it's safe and all that's okay. When we do the testing, is it necessary that we ask for a test on lead? And my other question is, how do I know that my neighbors are getting safe? Is there ever a way I can find out how safe my neighbor's water is? Is this a dumb question? I'm sorry. It's a public record for me to know that my neighbor's wells are safe also?
Well, there are, DNR tools that they have. It's a database. It's a mapping database, and they have, for new well construction or historic wells, they have it's spotty data on the DNR. Right now, the aggregate data that was mentioned earlier, that is kind of, from my understanding, we're trying to collect all of Dunn County's data and get it into one spot so that the public can access that. I'm not sure how easily identifiable you'll be able to make your neighbor, say you've got a neighbor named Bob and you want to know if Bob's water is safe. Well, I don't know if you're going to be able to go in and type their name in, because there's a certain level of anonymity that a lot of folks, a certain reasonable expectation of privacy. As far as your lead question, around here, from my understanding, we don't have too much of a problem. That's typically caused by pipes, old lead pipes. If you have a very old house, you might want to get it tested, but it's not something that you need to test for regularly like you do with nitrates. our groundwater areas that have high nitrates typically do, it's a pattern, but the groundwater is a constantly moving system. It's not just a static pool of water that we're pulling up from. Lead comes from our own construction, whereas nitrates often come from, you know, natural sources, land use, septic systems, human activity. So those are more likely to change than lead.
Yep, thank you. I expected that. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? All right, thanks, Heather. We'll move on then. Appreciate that discussion. Review of draft land division ordinance. Mr. Carlson.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a few things we need to discuss this morning as they relate to section 16.08, the classification of land divisions. So let me get down here. I guess we need to pick up on the conversation that we had at our last meeting. And I think maybe the best way for me to do this is to just give a quick 5 to 10 minute summary again of the three options that we discussed at the last meeting. And then Corp Counsel and I have introduced a fourth option, option D, that was in your packet that got sent out a week ago. So let me just real quickly refresh everybody's memory here on option A. And I'm going to bring up my illustrative diagram here. So here's our option A. This would be maximum of 4 lots smaller than 20 acres from each quarter or government lot within a contiguous tract may be created within a 5-year period. So again, our contiguous tract, we should all know what this is by now. We have it defined, but in a nutshell, it's all of my contiguous property undivided by roads or meandered bodies of water, railroads, things like that. So for this conversation, I'm going to use an 80-acre contiguous tract, 240s, if you will. Option A allows me to create 4 lots in each one of the 40s that are contained within this contiguous tract in a 5-year period. So the yellow highlighting are just, you know, we could pick any type of configuration you want. This is the configuration I chose, but I'm going to do lots 1 through, so this is right now in year 1, I'm going to do lots 1 through 4 on the northerly 40 and lots 5, 6, 7, and 8 on the southerly 40. I can do 8 lots right now on year 1 if we go with option A. And that's the option that we currently have in our ordinance that we're enforcing today, the ordinance that was adopted back in 2006. In 5 years, I can make more lots. I'm not limited. I'm only limited, I guess I'm limited by time and of course by acreage. Once I run out of acreage, I'm done. So I wait my 5 years, I come in and I can do 4 more lots on each one of these 40s. So lots 9 through 12 and lots 13 through 16. I wait another 5 years. So on year 11, I come in and do the green lots. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. So on year 11, I can end up with 24 lots out here, and I can keep going if the topography allows me to. My minimum lot sizes are being met, and of course access. A lot of times access is a limiting factor on how many lots I can do. So that's option A in a nutshell, okay? Then we move on to option B. This is density management by ratio as applied to the entire contiguous tract. So now we're getting away from, we're not even considering how many 40-acre parcels are each. We're not looking at 40s separately within that tract. We're looking at our contiguous tract. So now I have 80 acres, same contiguous tract, but I'm not looking at it on a per 40 basis. Now I'm applying a ratio, okay? And that ratio that we're proposing is exactly gonna match the zoning or the ratio that's listed in our zoning ordinance under the general ag zoning classification, which is 8:1. So I take my contiguous tract, in this case, which is 80 acres, I apply that ratio, and that calculation gives me exactly 10. I get 10 splits for the life of this parcel. Okay, so, but we're limiting it by time. So I'm going to read this. So option B, our definition here is a maximum of 4 lots smaller than 20 acres. And I know the committee was tossing around going with 5. We certainly can go with 5, but for right now, I'm just going to read it as it's written. A maximum of 4 lots smaller than 20 acres may be created within a contiguous tract, so within this 80 acres, in a 5-year period. Okay, so I can do 4 in there in the 5-year period. Maximum density for contiguous tracts subject to county zoning shall meet the requirements of the county zoning ordinance. So that takes care of itself in the zone townships. Maximum density for contiguous tracts not subject to county zoning, so that's the rest of the county, shall be 1 lot per 8 acres, or 8 to 1, which shall be calculated by dividing the area of the contiguous tract by 8. Any fractional result that's at least 80% or 0.8 shall be rounded up to the next nearest whole number. Contiguous tracts existing prior to the adoption of this ordinance, which are greater than 8 acres and smaller than 16, may be subdivided to create 1 additional lot. So we're recognizing and fully aware that we have parcels in this county that aren't at 16. You take 16 divided by 8, that gives you 2, allows you to split it. So right now, a strict interpretation of what we're proposing as option B would require at least 16 acres to divide your property. What happens to all those people that have 15 or 14 or 13 or more than 8 for that matter, between 8 and 16? Again, a strict interpretation would not allow them to divide that property. So we're giving them benefit of the doubt. Between 8 and 16 acres, we're going to allow you to divide that, create 1 additional lot. So if we apply that now to my contiguous tract, the calculation gives me 10. Right now, I can come in and I can put 4 lots somewhere on this 80 acres. I just happen to put them up here in the wooded area because I'm a farmer and I want to keep farming my farm ground down here. And this area has got some really steep slopes. So I'm going to put all 4 lots right here. Versus if we're in option A, I could do 8 lots, right? On year 1, I could do lots 1 through 4 and 5 through 8 because our ordinance would allow for that. Option B would not allow me to do 8 lots on year 1 because it's a density ratio applied to the entire contiguous tract. So it's going to take me some time to get up to 8. So I'm going to do my lots 1 through 4 on year 1, and I'm going to put them right here. I wait 5 years, I can do 4 more lots. So I'm going to do 5, 6, 7, and 8. I'm done. And then I wait another 5 years, so which would be year 11. I can make 2 more lots, 9 and 10, and then I'm done. That's how this works. It's density based. For the life of my parcel, I'm only going to get 10 lots in there. Now, if I'm in a zone township, I have a mechanism available to me. I can request a rezone, get it into a residential district that would allow me to create many more lots here. But if I'm in an unzoned township, I don't have a mechanism to create more lots. And we went through this last time. So under option B, same contiguous tract here of 80 acres, the maximum number of lots I will get is 10. If we go with option A, I could, easily end up with 24 and more than that, depending on access, topography, conditions of the site. So there are 2 options, A and B. One thing that came up actually this morning that I think is very important to this conversation is our option B. I spoke with our land information director, Steve Kochaver, land information officer, and he did a quick query of the number of parcels in the unzoned townships that are less than 8 acres, okay? That number was on either side of 2,500, give or take. So right now, if we look at the unzoned townships, which are Sand Creek, New Haven, O'Galley, Rock Creek, Elk Mound, and Spring Brook, there are approximately 2,500 parcels in those 6 townships that are less than 8 acres. That under our proposition of option B here could never be further subdivided. We need to keep that in perspective. Does everybody understand that? If we say between 8 and 16, you're going to be allowed 1 split, what happens to the landowner? Myself, say that I have a 7.5 acre parcel, and down the road I intended to split that in half so my brother could build a house on it, what have you. That's not going to be an option to me. So especially if I'm in an unzoned township, I can't rezone the property. So this wasn't brought up in the conversation last time, and I think it's something we certainly have to be aware of if we move forward with option B. definitely needs to be in the discussion. Option C.
Tom, could I ask a question there?
Sure.
And you're saying there's 2,500 parcels, and we have a couple like buildings development in the town of Colfax, and what we're seeing is people are actually buying an extra lot to increase their property to have more privacy, not just the opposite, not trying to break it down into smaller property. You know, so I just my observation over in our area.
Okay, thank you for that, Gary. So then we get into option C, and I don't have any illustrative diagrams, but so option C then would be maximum density. So this would be no density management in our land division ordinance. So maximum density for contiguous tracts, of course, are subject to county zoning, of course, shall need to meet the requirements of the county zoning ordinance as far as density is concerned. Those tracts, though, that are not subject to county zoning shall have no maximum density requirements. So what this means is in the unzoned townships, there's absolutely no density, and you'll notice in this section or option C, there's no time restriction imposed. So somebody could come in and, you know, do what we would consider as a major land development all at one time on day one with a series of certified survey maps. So that's option C. Option D is kind of a—
Tom, before you go on, could I just ask you to elaborate on that? So let's say somebody had 120 acres, divide that by 8, and you get a whole bunch of parcels that they could make. So that's a problem because we have less control over that than if someone made a plat. Could you you explain that to me one other time?
I think I know where you're going with this, and if I'm off base, I guess stop me. So let's just say I own 80 acres in the town of New Haven. So I'm in an unzoned township. Can I bring something down to you at noon, Bob? I've got a bunch of— Okay, I just got thrown off my game there a little bit, some background noise. Let me start over. So I own 80 acres in the town of New Haven, unzoned. So if I apply option C to that, I certainly don't have to comply with zoning. I don't have any maximum density requirements. I'm not restricted by time. So I'm going to hire my surveyor and tell him that, okay, I've got 80 acres. I want to make 36 lots out here. My surveyor tells me, well, I can do it by certified survey map. I can put 4 lots on a CSM. So I'm going to have to do 9 certified survey maps. We're going to, you know, design some roads in here, and you know, we have to provide access for all these, but I can certainly get this all done. We can be very crafty with how we're going to do this. We'll get it all accomplished by certified survey map. They submit those to the office for review, and we have to apply our ordinance. I mean, we lose that control. We don't get engineered road plans. We don't, you know, have stormwater management that we're looking at, or retention ponds. A lot of those things that come with the major land division review. So now let's just look at this from a different perspective. Say that we put the time element in here, okay? So we're going to limit this to 5 years. There is still no, so just by inserting one piece of information or one requirement, I guess, in here, the 5-year requirement, that changes or potentially changes everything. So now the scenario is still the same. I have 80 acres. I don't have any density to worry about. I want to make 36 lots out here, but our ordinance says that it's going to take me a considerable amount of time, right? Because I can do 4 in a 5-year period. Well, now I have to wait and then do my next 4. And if I'm fairly young, I have, you know, my whole life ahead of me, and I'm going to continue doing this in 5-year increments till I'm 85 years old. Maybe that's the road I want to go. It's just, we see with development that typically if people want to make 36 lots, for instance, they want to get it all done right now. They have a market for it. And, you know, if we tell them, well, you can do it by certified survey map, it's going to take you potentially 24 or 28 years to get this accomplished, or I guess multiples of 5, 25 or 30 years to get this accomplished. What are my other options? Well, you can do a plat, Mr. Developer. Well, what does that entail? Well, you can do all your lots right now, but you're going to be required then to do either a county plat or a state plat based on how big your lots are. And so then they decide, well, geez, I have a market for these. I think I want to sell all these in the next, 6-7 years. I'm going to go the plat route. Well, now they have more stringent requirements. We have erosion and control measures in place. You may remember we've added soil borings. If you're developing land by plat, there's a soil boring requirement, one for each lot. We have, engineered road plans. We have a lot of more in-depth review on these 36 lots. Then I guess we lose some of that local control if we take away the 5-year time element. Is that the discussion you remember, Mike? And does that answer your question?
Yes, that does answer. Thank you, Tom. And that would also apply even if there's a density. If someone had 200 acres,
correct,
without that time limit, they could put a whole bunch of lots in all at once. So the time limit is really important no matter what we do.
Yes. Yeah. And if there's anything I would support today is leaving the 5-year time limit in. I think it has great value. I certainly do. So if there's no more questions on, and we'll get into all these options again, I'm sure here, but I'm going to move on to option D, and then we can open it up for questions. So option D is a hybrid, if you will, a maximum of 5. We inserted 5 here. That's just because of, I guess, direction we perceive the county maybe, or the committee wanted to head. So a maximum of 5 lots smaller than 20 acres may be created within a contiguous tract in a 5-year period. Additional lots must be created by county plat or state plat. Maximum density. So again, this is density management only in zone townships. Maximum density for contiguous tracts subject to county zoning shall meet the requirements of the county zoning ordinance. Contiguous tracts not subject to county zoning shall have no maximum density requirements. So again, in the unzoned towns, there's not going to be any density, but we would impose a 5-year time restriction. So the example I just gave a few minutes ago would be applicable to this. In theory, I could create, 30, 40 lots on my contiguous tract if it was large enough, but I have to do it over a certain time period. So this option D is very similar to option C, with the exception that with the addition, I would say, or should say, of the 5-year time restriction. So that's all I have on these options right now. We went through options A through C, I think, in quite detail at the last meeting. Option D is just, a minor tweak on option C. And I would open it or send it back to the chair for discussion by the committee at this point. We are looking, Corp Council and I are looking for direction, obviously, on which option the committee wants to use as policy going forward in our draft.
Okay, thank you.
And Tom, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I can't seem to get my, oh, there we go. Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry about that. Any questions, comments from the committee?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just one comment. Perhaps we can make it easier if we look at and say the time limit is a really important thing no matter what we choose to do. And that seems something that we have to include, whether it's 4 or 5 lots. Our really only other decision, it seems to me, is do we extend density to the whole county or not?
I think that's a good summary of the basic questions, yeah. Gary, you had I'll get to you, Gary. From my perspective, to me, it's clear that from the consistency with our mission, our vision and comprehensive plan goals, applying a density requirement, like in example B, ends up with the kind of landscape that meets those needs most readily.
I totally agree, because that way you can put the homes or lots like where they're most undisturbing to the rest of the farming operation, and you're still be able to farm the land, and yet you still have the option of making some money on some land that you cannot farm or is more aptable for development. So I think it's a win for both the farmers and for the people that want to live out in the country and have a little more privacy. So I think like the density base for me is the way to go, and what I would support.
Mr. Chairman, I also agree with that. I think that's the direction we should take.
So anyone else?
Well, a comment, Mr. Chair, did you once tell me, we were talking about what a supervisor is supposed to do, and did you mention once to me about, I said, well, we set policy, and you said, well, we're supposed to be leaders. I'm not sure if you're the one that told me that, but it sounds smart, so it's probably from you. But, you know, I hold, well, I can't hold it up, I guess. But the directional plan, you know, we have three different areas in there that talk about this. We've got the ad hoc committee report that we did, our Wisconsin Land and Water Handbook, the LOSG, all these different things that we've done point to what Gary stated much shorter than I did. This is something that seems like we need to do if we're going to pay any attention to all the different things we've done in our comprehensive plan in addition.
Thank you. Anyone else? A question for Bob Colson. Well, for Tom Carlson. You and I have talked about fairness, obviously, is always an issue. And you and I have talked about somebody who plans on developing, who bought land in an unzoned township because it would make development easier. And all of a sudden we changed the rules on them. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I guess the only comment I would have is just to give an example. So let's just say this 80 acres here that I purchased this in the town of Sand Creek. Okay. And I bought it 10 years ago. I'm a developer and I thought, well, there's going to be a housing market up in Sand Creek at some point, and I'm going to buy this as a good investment. Part of the reason I bought it is it's unzoned, right? There's no strings attached, or at least a lot less strings attached. I bought it, you know, particularly for that reason, and I'm going to sit on it, and someday right before I retire, I'm going to develop this parcel. This is my 401k, so to speak. And I have no indication that I'm going to have problems. I'm an educated person. I've read the county ordinances. I feel very comfortable and confident in my retirement plan. Now all of a sudden the county adopts an ordinance, and maybe I'm not aware of that ordinance. I haven't been following the news or following local politics or public meetings, things like that. And, you know, 10 years go by and now I'm 63 years old. I want to make good on my retirement plan. So I contact a surveyor to come out and meet with me on site, work up a sketch plan for this dream that I've had my whole life. This is going to fund my retirement. And I'm sadly mistaken when the surveyor on the phone before he even comes out says, well, the county adopted an ordinance in 2021 that is density based and it applies county-wide. Well, what does that mean to me? Well, it means that we have to take your contiguous tract, divide it by 8, and that'll tell us how many parcels you can create out here. And when we do the math, Mr. Smith, you are allowed 10 splits for residential purposes on your property. Whoa, wait a minute. What other options do I have? Well, you don't have any other options. You are in an unzoned township. If you were in a zone township, we could potentially apply for a rezone, get you into a residential district that would not be density based, and open up your options and allow you to do what you always intended to do with this property. That owner is going to be, you know, potentially could be very upset with how things, the handy's been dealt. So that's just an illustrative example of how this, you know, could happen. I guess I don't have a preference. I'm not saying it's good, it's bad. I'm just saying this is a real possibility that the committee needs to be aware of.
Sure.
Yeah, these unzoned townships, you know, have decided not to participate in county zoning. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's a fact. There is no county zoning there. So that limits their constituents. It provides no mechanism for their constituents to create more lots on their property than what is allowed by a pure density calculation.
So Tom, I'm a little confused, and I apologize for that, but I thought you said that option A was basically what we have right now. Am I wrong about that?
No, you are correct. Option A is how we're enforcing the ordinance right now.
So that's basically because it has a term on the divisions.
Well, basic A or option A is 4 lots per 40 in a 5-year period.
Right.
Yep.
So that's what people are dealing with right now. Option E how would that differ from this? The new option you're proposing.
Option B.
No, the new option.
Oh, the new option? That's option D. Let me get back to that. So option D, you want to know the difference between option D and A.
Yep.
So option D, maximum density. So if we're in a zone township, so that part is really the same, because right now, even if we're in option A, people come in, they're limited by density. If they're in a zone township, you know, I tell them one thing, yeah, over time you can end up with 20 lots out here, but Bob is going to say, oh, not so fast. You're in a general ag zoning district. Once you hit the maximum number based on my calculation, you're done, even though the subdivision ordinance would allow you to do more. We have to look at the more restrictive ordinance. So from the zone townships where zoning is in place, option A and D are very similar there. There's really no difference. It comes into the unzoned towns.
Right.
So now we apply option A versus option D in an unzoned town. Option A says I can do 4 splits on each one of my 40s in a 5-year period, and I can keep doing that until I run out of land, okay, or access. Option D, if we read this, contiguous tracts not subject to county zoning shall have no maximum density requirements. So option D, yeah, there's no maximum density requirements.
It seems like the difference is under option D, you could keep on splitting forever, but it would take you 20 years to get past what you have up on option A.
Here is the difference, and it's so subtle, it's hard to see it, but it popped for me. The difference is option A, we're applying the 4 years or the 4 splits per 40 on each one of the 40s in the contiguous tract. So a simple example, my contiguous tract is 80 acres. I can do 4 lots on each one of those 240s in there. Option D, though, is applied to the entire contiguous tract, okay? So that's different. My contiguous tract doesn't change between A and D. There's still 80 acres. Option A says I can do 4 on each one of the 240s in there in a 5-year period. Option D says I can, let's just stick with 4, even though it says 5 in option D. So we're consistent for right now. A maximum of 4 lots may be created within the contiguous tract. So see how that's subtly different? My contiguous tract is still 80, but if we look at each one on year 1, under option A, the first year I can create 8 lots on my contiguous tract, whereas option D says I can only do 4 on my entire contiguous tract because we're not allowing 4 per 40 in that tract. We're applying the 4 lots differently. Does everybody see that? It's clear to me.
I don't see it.
Look at the word contiguous tract. I have option D on my screen, a maximum of 4 lots smaller than 20 acres may be created within a contiguous tract. So that contiguous tract is 80 acres, no matter if we're in option A, B, C, or D, it's still 80 acres. I'm allowed 4 lots in there in a 5-year period. Okay, so I can do 4 lots. If we go back to option A on year 1, I can do 4 lots from each quarter. So I have 2 quarters. So we need to go back to an illustration. It's a very subtle difference. So here's our illustration, right? If we apply option A, I can do 8 lots, 1 through 8 in yellow on year 1. If we look at option D, so take all these lots out of here now. If we look at option A, I can do lots 1 through 8. 4 have to be on each 40, that on year 1. If we apply option D, I can do lots 1 through 4, but that's it. I can't do 8 on year 1 because it's applied to the entire, the 4 lots is applied to the entire contiguous tract versus applied to each 40 within the contiguous tract.
So here's my question then on that is, to me, that seems like if in the example of a landowner who was planning on developing, that is a greater restriction on their ability to do that than what we currently have.
Option D, yes, would be a greater restriction.
I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be a better land use practice, but it would be a greater restriction on the speed of development.
Correct.
And that the other point would be, if someone buys a piece like in the mapping you have, if a developer or someone who intends to develop buys that 80 acres and holds it for 20 years, most likely there are some benefits to them that accrue during the period they're holding it. For example, they would be, I'm pretty sure they would be charged use value, property tax valuation on all of the farmable acres over that 20 years. They most likely would have the wooded acreage into the forest crop program, which would provide a similar tax deduction. So over the 20 years that they own that property, they would be able to maintain the cost of ownership in terms of property taxes at a really minimal rate. And then, of course, they can additionally then divide and get the value of the increased value. It feels like maybe that's a little bit of an offset to the somewhat modest restrictions we're putting on there. I know that's the way I see it, not the way they would see it, but.
Tom, I have a question again, it's Mike. So option D would allow them the flexibility to put the parcels on the best use of the land. They could put them wherever. And then 5 years later, they could put them wherever. They don't need to put it on each 40. So that would be beneficial, similar to what we have with the density based. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Mm-hmm.
If I might, as you consider these things or these options, option D, we put in 5, but it wouldn't have to be 5. We just put it in for illustrative purposes. And I see now, in order to avoid confusion, Tom is switching back over to 4 to talk about it. So the number of lots is something that you can make a decision on. Whether the splitting is indexed to a contiguous tract, or whether it's indexed as the verbiage in option D is, or whether it's indexed to a quarter or government lot, consistent with the language of option A, is a decision point that you can make also. And as you've observed, the indexing it to a contiguous tract allows the divisions in unzoned townships. So it slows down the numerosity of divisions in time. But it also eliminates the density, the imposition of the density requirements in unzoned towns. So the language in option D is at the last meeting, I kind of called it a hybrid, but for zoned towns, they have to meet the requirements of the density, and for unzoned towns, they don't. It's just the how many lots over what area of land, whether it's a 40 or a contiguous tract, as determined on the date of adoption of the ordinance, and how many lots over what period. And so I think there are 3 decision points that you have some degree of flexibility or discretion on.
Thanks, Nick. Any thoughts?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Gary.
my concern would be on the unzoned townships. If there is no restrictions, I'm kind of worried about the water quality issue on high density in rural housing. How that's going to affect like water quality. So that's why I think we got to have some restriction, but as little as possible, if that makes sense.
Mr. Chair, if I may ask Gary a question.
Sure.
Gary, maximum density. Well, first off, I totally agree. We've got to have something like the 5 lots in 5 years or something like that. But I'm just curious how you look at looking at contiguous tracts for that 5 lots in 5 years versus just the 40. Do you see that as a compromise? I didn't ask the question very good.
I just
how do you see the difference? Go ahead.
I just like the density, because it gives the landowner like more options to put the lots where they're more applicable, not just like every 40 acres, because every 40 acres is going to be completely different and might have a different access to the public roads and that kind of stuff. A lot less driveway length and that. So, but I'm not a big fan of regulations, but sometimes you got to have some just to protect the public too. And like you said, sometimes you got to be a leader too. Did that answer anything, Michael?
Yeah, I think so. So the difference between contiguous and using 40s, do you see one is better than the other?
What I like best about the contiguous is you can put the lots where they're probably better suited, like for the landowner and for the person that wants to buy it. Because does a potential home builder, do they want to put one out in the open field with no trees or nothing, or would they rather be in an area where the trees are already up and growing and they already got the atmosphere what they're looking for? Plus, with a little more vegetation, they have a little more privacy, and that's, I think, why they want to be out in the country in the first place. So it just gives I think, a better option for everybody, personally.
Do you see what you just mentioned there, having contiguous tract using as kind of a compromise versus extending density to the whole county?
That's a hard question to answer, Michael. That's what we're trying to get figured out. And, like you said, I respect the townships that don't want to be, zoned, but I also know that, like you said, like the groundwater doesn't stay in one place either. If you have a high density right on the edge of your township and it's right next to a zoned township, how's that going to affect them? You know what I mean? So there's no easy answer. But hopefully
thanks, Gary. I always appreciate your input.
Sometimes I don't explain it very good, but hopefully we can come up with a compromise that everybody can live with. that should be our ultimate goal.
And if I, Mr. Chair, could make
Sure. Yep.
a comment, as we sit here and speak, I can't help but seem to think that there's interest in option D. So let me, and I apologize, I don't have an illustrative example of option D, but maybe we can make or morph option B into option D. So if we look at let's apply option D. We're going to take all these lots off here for a minute. I've got a contiguous tract of 80 acres. If the county goes forward with option D, in its exact language, 5 parcels in a 5-year period with no density. So I have this 80-acre parcel. I'm a farmer, and I realize, okay, I'm unlimited on how many lots I can do here. It's going to take me some time. I'm going to do my 5 lots right now on year 1. So I hire a surveyor, and again, if my goal is to preserve my farm ground, I'm going to put lots 1 through 5 right where they are, right here. I have that flexibility. I can put them anywhere on this 80 acres. I'm going to put them right there in where they're best suited. I'm going to wait 5 years, and on year 6, I'm going to get my surveyor back out, and I'm going to create lots 6 through 10 because the ordinance allows me to do it. I'm going to develop the best part of the land that's best suited for residential at this time because I'm agriculture conscious. I want to keep my farm ground. I'm also environmentally conscious, and I don't want to develop this steep area. So, option D gives me the flexibility to put these lots where they're most suited. It's a controlled development. I can't just, take off and do all this all of a sudden unless I do a plat, right? Option D gives me that, or option D, I always, with these options, a plat is always there. Except for if we're true density. If we're true density, the plat is not an option immediately. I would have to, if I'm in a zone township, get it rezoned. So, but if we look at just option D, if I want to make additional lots must be created by county plat or state plat. So if I really want to create 20 lots right off the bat, I'm going to have, and I'm in an unzoned township, I'm going to have to do a major land development, which has more restrictions placed on it. So hopefully that helps. I still can cluster these lots as Gary was alluding to with option D. Of course, once I get them clustered and as time goes on, I want to create more lots. Well, my best area, the areas best suited for residential development might slowly be, in theory, are disappearing. So now I'm forced to either go into this area of steep slopes or start carving out some of my prime farm ground. And option D gives me that latitude to do that. Nothing is stopping me from doing that. Whereas if we were density based, I would be stopped here. Once I hit my 10th lot, I'm done. So does everybody understand that? Option D is a very good option. But as time goes on, I need money. Everybody's in a different financial situation. I might need this money for whatever reason. I have a lot of health insurance bills I have to pay, and I'm forced. I'm going to make 5 more lots, and I'm going to take them right out of that farm ground. The ordinance allows me to do it. I don't want to do it, but in time, I am going to be allowed to do that. Whereas if we were density based, I would be stopped in my tracks. So I hope that illustrates or provides some more information on option D.
Tom, with regard to the question you brought up earlier about the 2,500 parcels that are under 8 acres, how would either of these options apply to that?
Well, option B is the only one that's really going to affect those, because if we're in an unzoned township and we're if we're not dealing with density ratio, then there is no issue with parcels under 8 acres.
So that 7-acre parcel could be divided how many times?
Well, based on our minimum lot size, which is 1 acre. So you do the math, whatever it would work out to be. But, and of course, then providing, depending how the parcel is configured and where the access points are, right, maybe you could get 4 or 5 lots out of that 7 acres. Maybe you could only get 2 or 3, depending on conditions, site conditions and access. But
is there a way to allow, I don't know, is there a way to allow a split of those parcels without, with some kind of a, I don't know, I'm thinking.
So you're saying if we stuck with option B, density based, but relax the restriction on the smaller parcels being able
Had
to
a
be
special provision for smaller parcels, yeah,
Well,
like one split or something like that.
Yeah, what you could say is, well, you just decrease, instead of saying from 8 to 16, you'd reduce that and say between 4 and 16 or something would be allowed one to be split
Okay.
once, or
Yep.
you'd pick what your lowest number would be, whether that's 2, 3, 4, let's just say 4, and you'd say between 4 and 16, we'd allow you to split it once.
So we'd have the same number of splits, but they could be, each individual split could be smaller, or several of them could be smaller.
We would effectively reduce the size of the parent tract or the contiguous parcel that would be allowed to be split.
Does the committee feel like they're able to make a recommendation today, or would we like to revisit this? I hate to drag it out, but it's an important decision for the county. Any thoughts?
I wonder if we could focus on option D and bring it back and look at it again next committee meeting.
Option D, you said, Mike?
Yes, D, yes. At that time, we'd have time to think about it. We could decide whether we want 4 or 5 lots. It seems like that's the one it's a nice compromise. It does some protecting of our resources. That's my suggestion. I'd like to focus on option D and bring it back next time. Think about it.
Any other comments? Mr. Bartlett.
Mike asked Gary about the option D as a compromise, and I guess I feel it's probably the best compromise for the on-zone townships. Just seems like it to me that that's the best compromise.
Any other thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a question. It feels like the committee members are essentially ruling out option B, or not?
Not necessarily. No. You want to leave that on the table also, Diane?
I'm sorry. Well,
you want to leave that on the table also?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's do that then. I think we see the value of option D, and we'd like to learn more about how that would work and how it could be massaged. And the same, to some degree, is true with option B. So I don't know if that's helpful to you, Tom Carlson, but.
Well, the one thing it does, I think, with your permission, can we remove option C then from our draft?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll pull option C. We'll leave the other 3 in there then. And I will make an illustrative example of option D with an air photo so we can put some maybe better perspective on it at the next meeting.
That'd be great. Any other thoughts before we wrap this up? Thanks for a good discussion. Okay, I think, is that the end of our action items or our discussion items? We acted on number 8 and 6A, B, and C. Any announcements?
Well, I just, if I could, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just so that you realize that next meeting, there is the public hearing for the rezone. I don't see that it's going to be a long drawn out discussion, but there will be that rezone for the piece of land and that was zoned R2 and should be commercial there in the town of Red Cedar. So that should be pretty straightforward, but that is on the agenda.
Yeah.
I am also, Heather mentioned, that I should probably have some results of the work that land conservation is doing for zoning to have an idea maybe of what it really takes to do the data entry portion of the sanitation maintenance records. And I don't think I want to bring this up at the February 9, but certainly at the meeting after February 9, I'm ready to bring, or will be ready to bring some information from the comp plan for preliminary discussion, specifically some maps, the existing land use and proposed land use, and a draft of the land use element, which I think is pretty much the big piece of the comp plan that we're kind of overhauling. So so coming out of that discussion with the committee, I think that would be appropriate to say, well, we're ready to take it for public comment, or no, these are things that we're concerned about. So I want to start the dialogue with the committee about the comp plan here coming up in February.
Okay. All right, any other announcements? So we'll have Mr. Cummings on board for our next meeting, and look forward to seeing everybody again.